Hello everyone, I am Raymund Cadiz, and so for today's video, we're going to be talking about a research conducted by a group from BSIT 1A of UCC Congressional Campus. The title of the said research is See-Through, a feasibility study on the effectiveness and setbacks with the looking glass self of first-year CSD students in UCC Congressional Road. So you might be wondering, what's going to be our agenda for today's video? Here are the topics and chapters we will be covering. If you want to skip some parts, you are very welcome to look at the timestamps. Just hover your mouse in the playhead and click wherever you want to skip. So without further ado, let's get started with Chapter 1, that is to be discussed by Mr. Diccion and Mr. Binalet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video.
Hi everyone, I'm Niljan Di Binalet. Me and my partner, Diccion, will show you around Chapter 1, where we will present the introduction, background of the study, statement of the problem, hypothesis, scope and delimitation, and significance of the study. Background of the study. This is where the researchers explore the study builds on or refutes findings from previous studies. Also, any relevant information that you readers need to know before delving into the paper. For example, not everyone knows what is looking glass self or who contributed the most in that field. In here, the researchers found data from the recent study conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health. The overall lifetime prevalence of social anxiety among adolescents is estimated by 9.1%, with an averagely increasing 1.3% severity impairment. Studies also show that there is a distinct reason why social anxiety is still a thing to teenagers. According to Mayo Clinic, this kind of anxiety might take control on anyone's life with just a little avoidance to culture and communication. This is caused by abundance of low self-esteem and poor social skills. The researchers thought, why does some adolescents find it hard to become part of the society and sync itself with low self-esteem? So what is looking glass self? According to Charles Horton Cooley, who has the most popular contribution, which was his proposition in this theory that it is the demonstration of self-relationship, or how one perceives oneself, which also includes others. Based on the research conducted by Nathan, Cooley states that society and individuals do not denote separable phenomena, but are simply collective and distributive aspects of the same thing. Cooley theorizes that humans have an inherent proclivity to learn, interact with, or socialize with the people and objects around them. Looking glass self is the process by which people evaluate themselves based on how others see them, portraying the whole self-image of a person using the most crucial external variable that affects their social life, which is others' perception of who they really are. When viewed as something other than individuals, a separate individual is an abstract unknown to experience, as is society. Real human life, whether considered in a figure or social context, is always both individual and general. For example, someone may believe they are very attractive because someone complimented their shirt or hair. Alternatively, a person may believe they are unattractive because another person commented negatively on their footwear choice. Thus, the looking glass self has a crucial impact on the development of one's self-image. According to Cooley, looking glass self may be impacted distinctively depending on the variety of the interaction as well as the individuals involved in the interaction. In general, people take seriously the comments and reaction of those they trust. The looking glass self can be accomplished in 3 major steps. First, consider how one appears to others, whether peers, household, classmates, workmates, or any random person encountered. Second, one imagines how a person will be evaluated based on how others perceive him or her. For example, a person may be thought to be humorous, clever, or wise. The third step is to develop oneself based on one's impression of other people's evaluation or judgments. For example, suppose an interviewee believes he is an intellectual and smart candidate who will easily get the job. Research hypothesis. In this section, this is where the researchers find any relationship between variables. In the research case, the researchers try to find the connection between the looking glass self, self-esteem, and social relationship. This study aims to explore the positive and negative effects of the concept through the theory looking glass self with the personality and self-image of first-year CST students in University of Caloocan City. It is hypothesized that Cooley's theory, the looking glass self, can affect students' self-esteem and their relationship between someone, be it family, a friend, classmates, schoolmates, or university personnel. Now we're going through the discipline and sub-discipline. First of all, discipline is the field of study, a branch of a particular knowledge. Thought and research, meanwhile, sub-discipline is also a field of study or work related to one aspect but not the whole. So, as you can see, the discipline is understanding the self and the sub-discipline is the looking glass self. Significance of the study. This is where the spark of interest will start. Both researchers and readers will be able to appreciate the work when they have better understanding of its relevance and potential impact. As per what you are witnessing, the researchers have shown that this not only benefit adolescents or students or the professionals in this field, but the society itself. Researchers shared that with the outcome of this research, it can serve as reference material for future researches. Also including that parents and teachers can also gain benefits from it by future or by much better guidance and support that is needed by the adolescents.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am John Denbert Layson, and today I and Mr. Temones will be presenting our part on Research Chapter 2, Review of Related Literature and Study. So this chapter reviews the foreign and local literature and studies that are relevant in the research. To better explain, the most important focus of the study different books, journals, theses were also closely and carefully reviewed to help resolve the problem that has been stated. There are plenty of factors that may influence the individual's concept of self, specifically the concept of self that develop by observing how they are perceived by others, which we now know as the looking glass self. Some may benefit us and some may affect us negatively, but no matter which, it is us that has the power to control our sentiments. Conductors gathered intelligence that have the researchers a wide variety of knowledge to further understand the aspects of the looking glass self. These are of significant and demonstrable bearing on the matter of the researcher's hand. People lives revolve around the concept of belonging. Belonging contains a sensual component. If belonging is identified through this sensual element, it is a feeling about a person being accepted into society and societal acceptance based on this admission by CUSAT 2003. Throughout the student's education, the student enhances his or her sense of belonging to their own learning environment. It can be seen that these students are more concerned about the school activities, appreciating and developing positive feelings for the school, and as byproduct, being more inclined into education. Proponent asserts that students who are acquainted with the people or the students in their school have a greater chance of being successful in their education due to the prospects of developing a positive feeling, hence may cause them to function well. And this concept in the people's lives is called belonging. Students whose belonging is efficacious, have a higher success expectancy owing to the reason that there is a connection between students' belonging and their motivation. Nearly all of us participate in extracurricular activities at school. Because these activities are social organizations, they have an impact on each of us in terms of belongingness, which is the quality or state of being an important or necessary component of something. Advocates contend that students' behavior is influenced by their acceptance at school because a lack of it may make them feel excluded. Socialization, recognized as a process that plays an important role in the development of personality. Some norms shape socialization process which are shaped by society's culture. People can easily socialize and integrate into societies through these activities. And this concept is applied to the research population, university students. Activities that may help students socialize are organized at universities. No man is an island, as the saying goes, which emphasizes that humans are social beings whose personalities are shaped by everyone with whom we meet and speak. This is how socialization is defined. Socialization is a process, but it's much complex than just interacting with someone and calling yourself socially active. We learn things from social experiences, and since knowledge is a fundamental mechanism wherein the minority lifestyle or heritage are absorbed by the dominant culture of society, members of it learn things from one another. Society and humans are in for a long haul. However, individuals should work on their capacity to educate themselves and distinguish between good and evil. According to the researchers, everyone has a personal ego, and since socializing is one of people's essential requirements, or students' needs in this case, school activities are a remarkable method to encourage sociability and happiness rather than introversion. Cooley theorized that human beings possess an inherent tendency to reach out, interact, or socialize with those people and objects that surround them. These connections can bore impressions and perception, which are helped by made by the behaviors person shows towards other or the person they have interacting with. Self-Esteem and Self-Perception, based on study conducted by Sarah A. Frick and Christina M. Frederick in 2017. Self-esteem is defined as the feeling about oneself based on the presence of implicit stimuli, and self-perception is defined as the way an individual perceives themselves in the presence of these same implicit or explicit stimuli. Those two are the most affected aspects of the human psyche by the negative effects of the looking glass self. So, have you ever thought about how other people perceive you? I mean, seriously though, about it. We all wonder what people think of us every now and then, but normally we tend to wonder. This is this is true curiosity rather than for any constructive reason. So, in other words, being aware of how you come across to other puts you in charge, which will make you appear and feel more confident. Since we have the tendencies to reach out and socialize, we can prevent ourselves from being affected by what other people's judgment on us. Even though our self-esteem and self-perception are the most affected by the negative effects of the looking glass self, it is crucial not to let ourselves lose to other people's and their impressions to us, as our conductor suggests. We, what really matters is what we genuinely think about ourselves. Thank you.
The researchers, in consideration to the aspect of oneself, concludes that it is worth noting that society gives the greatest consequences and carry out most of the effects to someone's perspective. It is stated that socialization encompasses the entire process of learning throughout one's life, and that socialization has a significant impact on both adults and children's behavior, beliefs, and actions. Research states that the self-esteem of a person is affected and would be hard to change, especially if the society around itself is concerned. Technological advancements led to the world that revolves around the internet. Research says that social media, in which 90% of teenagers and adolescents is a big influence to their social life. If a person's thinking pattern is affected by social media, it would be the cause why their perspective and how they see themselves is also affected on how they interact online. At first glance, you may seem to be overwhelmed by the numbers of arrows and text that is within the framework, but when you look at it step-by-step process, you can systematically see how a person can present oneself from a simple interaction. This study's theoretical framework starts with an interaction, which by then followed by the mode of communication used. Then after the mode of communication is feedback, in which there are two types of feedback, the positive feedback and the negative feedback, and both leads towards the looking glass self. You may notice that there are some arrows from the looking glass self back to the vocal person to feedback. It is because the looking glass self bases on their sense of self through on how they believe others see them, or how a vocal person can affect oneself and give an impact or feedback to oneself. The looking glass self is hereby followed by the two types of perception, distinct perception and general perception, which will lead to the response, then self-esteem, and this finishes on self-presentation. This will conclude that in a simple interaction from different people, their feedback can affect oneself, either positive or negative feedback, and that the perception of other people can really affect oneself, especially on how they will present oneself.
Hi, I'm Lester P. Arubio, and I will be presenting our research chapter 3, Research Design and Methodology. This chapter presents the research design of the study, sampling technique utilized by the course of study, mode of instrumentation used, mode of validating results, data gathering and procedures, and statistical treatment of data gathered. Research design. To achieve the purpose of the study, the descriptive and qualitative method will be employed. Descriptive method involves description, recording, analysis, and interpretation of the conditions that now exist. This involves the collection of data that will provide an account or description of individuals, groups, or situations. Instruments that the researchers use to obtain data in descriptive studies include questionnaires. Study population. For a study population, the researchers selected 10 first-year CSD students to participate in the study based on researchers' benefit, availability, and accessibility. All of the respondents are enrolled in University of Caloocan City Congressional Campus. The sampling approach in this study is the convenient sampling. Convenient sampling is usually used in qualitative research. The sampling technique uses selected subjects because they are accessible and close. Researchers' instruments. The following are the list of research instruments which were used in the data gathering during the course of the study. Qualitative data were collected through survey, using a survey form to collect data and easily amends the data needed and to lessen the expense. The usage of Google Forms easily solved the lack of answer form or questionnaires, and it is easy to share to other respondents. Close-ended, static, and open-ended, dynamic. Question items were constructed to collect information from first-year CSD students. The questions items were prepared in the English or Filipino and developed using 5-point and 10-point Likert scales. The 5 points were weighed according to the degree of relevance. Poor, 1. Somewhat poor, 2, good, 3, very good, 4, and excellent, 5. The researchers used close-ended static question items such as multiple choice, single response, multiple choice, multiple responses, and Likert scales, while the open-ended questions are asked with their specified text boxes for the respondents to freely dictate their opinions and about the matter. Methods. This qualitative research study looked at the average result of survey. Outcomes given to the first-year CSD students of University of Caloocan City Congressional Campus to determine whether looking glass self are responsible for positive and negative effects on their self-image, using respondents to help the researchers by selecting distinct persons that researchers believe will give the most information. The participants in this study are the first-year CSD students of University of Caloocan City Congressional Campus.
Hello everyone, it's me again, Raymund Cadiz, and so for this part of the video, we're gonna be talking about the part 4 of the proponent's research, which consists of the summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. Let's start with the summary of findings result of the study. For the first question, the researchers tried to find the profile of respondents in terms of gender. As regard to the result, we can see that a large number of the respondents belong to males, having almost 80% of the answers, while we have 10% in the male, while we have 10% in the female, and another 10% on which they prefer to not state their gender. Now you might say that this first question will be extremely irrelevant to the upcoming results and answers that the respondents will give us, since based on the recent study conducted by the National Library of Medicine, it is in fact that most women are prone in anxiety disorders and depression throughout their lifespan. But now that we know that only 10% of the respondents are female, it is going to be a setback by which we will know if there's gonna be a difference with the effects of looking glass self in accordance with someone's gender. Now, on our second question, it is all about the profile of the respondents in terms of CSD course. Now here in our data, it shows that the number of respondents as regards to the offered course they're currently taking in computer science department. According to the data, most of the respondents are information technology or IT students with a 40% proportion. While we have 30% from computer science course, we also have another 30% from entertainment and multimedia computing. This data can help us determine if their offered course is actually having an effect, by which it can be a factor on how Looking Glass Self works on a course that focuses on academics or on-hand activities. On our third question, we can see the respondent's self-description in terms of self-esteem. Now, if you refer to the legends, we have poor, somewhat poor, average, good, and excellent. This represents the general condition of their current self-esteem. We can see that 60% of the respondents describes their self-esteem as rather average at the time they were answering this survey, while 20% of the respondents are having a little bit of trouble expressing their self-esteem, stating that it's somewhat poor, while another 20% of the respondents acknowledge their own self-esteem as good. With this data, we can say that most of the respondents are neither having a great self-esteem nor a poor one. This creates a loophole by which we mostly have a neutral ratio on the respondent's self-esteem. As we all know, self-esteem is one of the concepts that Looking Glass Self directly impacts on one's self-perception. If proven that Looking Glass Self can be used to somewhat adjust one's self-esteem, this 80% right here could rise up to either good or excellent. On our fourth question, the researchers tried to find out about the respondents' recent interactions with their friends, colleagues, and schoolmates. Let's look at the data real quick. Here we can see that 70% of the respondents have a good to excellent recent interactions with their friends, colleagues, and schoolmates, while the remaining 30% says average and somewhat poor, indicating they don't really interact or rather having a bad experience with their friends. Now, since we're talking about how the perspective of someone else's effects on your perception of self, it is very important that there should be an interaction going on. This shows not only the effects of Looking Glass Self on how a person interacts, but also on why some of them refuses or could not communicate with their friends, colleagues, and schoolmates. Jumping to the next question, we can see the respondents' mode of communication with their friends, colleagues, and schoolmates. The majority of the respondents, as shown in the data, use social media to communicate with their friends, colleagues, and classmates. Face-to-face communication came in second, with the recent implementation of new normal system, indicating that they now meet their friends in person. We also have some outdated way of communication, which is the use of text messages and phone calls. Now, since it is very important to see if a person is having interactions, it is also important to know how the interaction occurs. What is the mode of their communication? As we all know, discussing serious matters requires a face-to-face conversation with the recipient and the sender. Some people also prefer communicating through the use of online platforms, as it is more convenient and easier nowadays. But regardless of their preference, the way of communication takes a really big impact on how Looking Glass Self works. The intensity of effect on one's perception of self is pertinent on how they receive it. However, some respondents showed no identifiable effects on the mode of communication to the effects of Looking Glass Self. On our next question, the proponents tried to find out how the respondents perceive on what others think of them. This basically gives them a general proposition of the current effects of the looking glass self to them. And based on the survey conducted of 30% of the respondents receives the criticism they take positively, and 20% says they are negatively affected by those who give them opinions and relatively getting insecure, while the remaining 50% state that they are not affected by the other's perception at general instances. Each and every respondents have their own ways in perceiving others' perception. But as we've characterized on how they see it, it seems that most of them doesn't show any distinguishable effect of others' perception to them. But as we dive deeper and ask more questions about their interactions and how they take feedbacks from other people, we'll see the difference from this referential data and final findings about the effects of looking glass self to self-respondents. Here we can see the responses we collected throughout the survey. The proponents didn't apply any changes, but instead we utilized the language and dialect they used to understand more the message they wanted to portray. There are 20% of these are the 20% of the respondents who received negative impact from what others think of them. On our first feedback, we have Mr. Loreto's answer. It says here that sometimes I feel overwhelmed, but mostly I feel normal since I know what others think of me. Now in this answer, he emphasized that he is sometimes overwhelmed, which means that he usually does have a mixed heavy emotions when receiving a perception from other people. This applies some of the effects we tackled earlier about the mental stability and self-esteem of a person taking a feedback. Here we have our next feedback, which is from Miss Maria Monica Jimenez. She stated that, to be honest, nai-insecure ako kasi hindi ako sure kung sa anong paraan ba nila na talaga ako nakikita and nakikilala. Aware din ako na they only see me as the part of me na nagjo-joke lang palagi, masiyahin and feeling close. So, ewan. Sa tingin ko, ayun yung mga image ko sa kanila kasi ayun lang naman yung mga napapansin nila sa akin. Nakaka-overthink na din minsan yung ganoong mga bagay, kaya negative yung dating and impact sa akin ito. In contrast to what most people feel, Ms. Jimenez feels insecurity when receiving an uncertain opinion from other people. This creates a confusion inside her that affects her self-esteem when talking to someone. She is aware that others only see the goofy characteristics of her and that she's only trying to fit in. She doesn't feel like she belongs to the group most of the time since some feedback about herself and personality. Now we're going to be talking about the 30% of the respondents who are affected and takes general influence from criticism they receive from other people. On our third feedback, we've got the response of Mr. Godwin Jimenez. He said that I feel conscious because they might think I'm bad because they judge me on my outer shell. He stated here that he feels conscious. He is afraid that he's been showing a rather bad impression to other people. This affects his overall interaction every time he talks or communicates with his friends. He constantly watches what he says to not give a negative impression or something that will offend the other party. On our next, we've got Mr. Velasquez's answer. Ang aking nararamdaman sa kung paano ko tingnan ng ibang tao ay kaba at tuwa. This was said by Mr. Velasquez regarding on our question number 1. He perceives others' opinion depending on what they think of him. Sometimes he feels scared that other people might think negatively about him, while on the other side, he feels happy that others might think positively about him. On our next response, we have Mr. Loreto. He said that, Mr. Lorezo. He said that sometimes it hurts when they judge or backstab me, but Never mind. Mind your own business. He implied that there are some times where others' judgment hurts him. But despite all of these opinions that affects his mental disposition and thinking, he just doesn't mind them. He continues his day without any problems, and just like on our last response, he sees these opinions as rather a useless constructive feedback. So now that we tackled the ones who are affected, we're going to be talking about the 50% of the respondents who are not affected and do not take a general influence from the criticism they take from other people. Our next response is from Mr. Timothy Francisco Eric. He stated that don't care about their opinion. Di kakataas ng grades ko ang chismis nila. Now, Mr. Eric deliberately conveyed that he is very focused on his academics. And that is why he mostly just ignored most of the negative feedbacks he received from other people. He just generally doesn't care if the other party thinks positively or negatively about him. Mr. Eric only shows interest and prioritizes all of his schoolworks to pass his grades. Here on our next feedback, we have Mr. Odango's response. It stated that, normal lang. This might be a pretty short response, but based on all of his feedbacks, this answer holds a pretty deep meaning. What he meant by normal is that he's trying to not pay attention to those who give their opinion about him. It is not like he generally doesn't care, but instead, he sees these opinions as a rather useless constructive feedback. Next, we have Mr. Buso's response, which says that I think someone I met before think of me negatively if they ever remember me based on my past actions. He didn't specifically say how he thinks, but rather just said that others think of him negatively. This neither impact him or his current mental status, so it is safe to say that he has a neutral perception of how others think of him. Alright, so here we have Miss Brass's response, which says that sometimes I care, most of the time I don't. Now, Miss Brasa also perceives others' opinions depending on the feedback they give to her. If it's something that might help her improve her personality and general self-presentation, she would take that opportunity to raise her own concept of self. But most of the time, which are useless feedbacks, she practically ignores them and focuses on what matters on the current time she received that feedback. And lastly, the response came from Mr. Holion, which stated that I will just ignore it. Just like the last four responses, he doesn't care on what others think of him. His perception to these feedbacks doesn't directly affect his self-concept of self, but rather misses and deflect a bit of his attention when he's having an interaction or conversation with someone else. And that concludes our first question. Our respondents had some pretty good responses as of now. Let us see how they do in the next question. So without further ado, let's jump to the second open-ended question. Okay, now our next question is all about the self-image. The researchers wants to directly ask the respondents how others' perspective affects their self-image. And we found out that according to the survey conducted, 40% of the respondents stated that their own perception of their self-image is not affected by others' perspective. They noted that they do not care on what is the opinion of the others. The other 40% said that they are not affected by crowd's judgment and insights of who they are, while the remaining 20% of the respondents stated that their perception depends on how they interact with others and that they should portray themselves differently around colleagues, friends, through the use of self-presentation. Here we have the 40% of the survey which they are affected by crowd's judgment and insight of who they are. On our first response, we got Mr. Loreto, which stated that I often believe them since they are the ones who can see me. Based Based on its answers, the proponents concluded that Mr. Loreto thus established his own perception by what he hears from other people. Since he couldn't judge or either see himself in front of other people, he uses others' opinions to see how he's doing or showing his self-presentation in front of them. While Miss Brasa says that it affects me but not that much. I just gaslight myself into thinking that everybody's gonna die and no one's gonna remember me. So yeah. So Miss Brasa uses a coping mechanism to deflect some opinions that practically affects her. She manipulates her own psychological thinking to make others' opinion irrelevant and insignificant to what's gonna happen to her and the future. Now for our third response, we have Mr. Velasquez. He stated that naapektuhan ng aking self-image ayon sa paningin or opinion ng iba sa paraang nagkakaroon ako ng ideya kung sino ako sa harap ng tao, kung saan nalalaman ko ang aking mga pagkakamali. So just like Mr. Loreto, Mr. Velasquez uses others' opinion to know himself much better. There's no person who can see the real you but the ones that actually interacts with you most of the time. May part na unti-unti din bibuild up yung self-esteem ko, but mas nangingibabaw yung negative na effect sa akin, like nang sinagot ko yung unang question, also due to the past experiences ko na din. Minsan naisip ko na ganito dapat yung gagawin ko, na kahit hindi naman talaga ako ganoon, para na mag-fit in and i-accept ako nila as a friend, which is said by Miss Monica Jimenez. Alright, now the following responses are the 20% of the study population, by which their perspective depends on the interaction or the type of peers they're having in communication with. For our next response, we have Mr. Patrick Busto, and his response is, like how I thought they think of me, that's how I think to myself, because I'm sure I did enough bad decisions that lead me to this kind of thinking to myself. This implies that there wouldn't be smoke if there's no fire. Mr. Busto faces the perception the same way how others see it from him. This way he can perceive not only from his point of view, but rather on a different side that actually see who he really is. Next response is from Mr. Lorenzo. He stated that we all know that we all have differences that can cause of judging. So you shouldn't take care of yourself to prevent bullying. Mr. Lorenzo didn't focus on what he receives, but rather said his general point of view and opinion about the topic. He also mentioned that we should all take care of about the mental health, and that we should not tolerate those who use this concept of looking glass self as a way of bullying. The next response are based on the remaining 40% of the respondents, who generally implied that they are not affected, neither do their self-image from others' perception. Our response came from Mr. Julian, which stated that I don't care as long as ginagawa ko ang tama. I don't care what others might say as long as you don't lose yourself just to be in someone's standard. Mr. Julian clearly affirmed that he does not pay any attention from the opinions as long as he is doing the right thing. He also expounded that the concepts regarding the self-presentation of those who pretends to be someone else just to be in a specific group or community. The next response is from Mr. Godwin Jimenez. He stated that it doesn't affect me because I don't care what they say. Just like the recent and few upcoming responses, it is more likely that Mr. Jimenez doesn't pay any attention from others' opinion. He might be protecting his current self-image, but is also locking himself up from improvement. Some feedbacks might be useless, but based on his response, it does seem like he receives a constructive feedbacks every now and then. Our next response is from Mr. Odango, and he simply said, none. Wala. Others' perspective does not affect him in any other way. He is one of the people who deliberately ignores someone else's feedback to contain and preserve his self-image, as he is much content than taking up others' feedback to his general self. As I've said earlier, this closes up a few pointers for him to improve himself from actually helpful feedbacks for him. For our very last response, we have Mr. Eric stating that, to be honest, their opinion doesn't affect me slightly. Sabi nga nila, kwenta mo yan, malamang masama ako dyan. Be honest, we all do that. Now, Mr. Eric is trying to say that most of the people antagonize some personality to raise their self-esteem. This might be one of the reasons why looking glass self could be a setback to some of the people who experience social anxiety. And that's pretty much it for me, guys. I hope you learned something. I'll be passing the mic to Mr. Mahinay for the remaining open-ended questions. Peace out.
Hello, I am Luis Gabriel P. Mahinay, leader of Group 1, and I will be continuing the open-ended questions discussion started by Mr. Cadiz. Here we can see that the proponents have collected in the third open-ended research questionnaire. In accord with the survey, the proponents found that 50% of the respondents mostly received feedbacks from their friends, while another 50% on the merged respondents also responded that they received feedbacks from their family. Furthermore, 20% of the overall respondents stated that they neither received any opinions, feedbacks, or perceptions to their family nor friends, and noted that it usually depends on people's first impression. Considering different factors, proponents discerned the data gathered and came up with friends giving the most positive feedbacks while family giving the most negative feedbacks to the respondents. Here are the feedbacks from the respondents. For our first feedback, we have Mr. Loreto's response. He says, "Some people that I met for the first time are the ones that gives me a bad impression, like about my skin, height, hair, etc. But oftentimes are my friends and loved ones. Some are positive, some are negative." In his response, we can see the duality, that there is a positive and negative perception coming from those he met, his family, and also from his friends. For the second response, we have Mr. Odango with his response, "Friends always positive." Here we can see that Mr. Odango is always receiving positive perception from his friends. In our third responder, we have Ms. Jimenez that responded, "Mostly kahit sa mga nakakahalubilo ko lang, like acquaintances lang, and minsan sa friends ko na din. Sinasabi nila yung positive sa akin. May mga friends din ako direct to the point naman nagsasabi ng negative, but nakikita ko yan as a help na din para sa akin, para maging better." We can see in Ms. Jimenez's response that her friends give her a positive and her more on direct to the point friends also give her negative perceptions, but it is for her to change for the better. These kinds of friends are the best to keep as they guide you and they're not afraid to point out things that are bad about you or for you. This is the fourth responder, Mr. Eric's response. "Well, I never heard something about myself from other person." Mr. Eric's response says that he never heard something about himself from other person. This means Mr. Eric had never had someone tell their perception about him. This kind of response is a game changer for this study because it means other people don't hear any perception about themselves from other people because no one tells them anything, or they haven't known anyone who will tell them a positive or negative perception. This response from Mr. Gusto is kind of the same with our first responder, Mr. Loreto. He says that, "My family, they're the most accessible one to me, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. The only difference they had is that he only hears those perceptions from his family according to his response. His family gave him both positive and negative perceptions about himself because his family are the most accessible people for him. And we, the researchers, think that it is normal as it shows how a normal family works. Our family will always point out things about us, either it is positive or negative." Here, our sixth responder, Mr. Lorenzo has the exact same response as to Mr. Loreto, but like Mr. Gusto, who has only family to have a positive and negative perception of him, the people that have the dual perception of him does not include those he met and has a first impression on him. His response says, to my friends, family, loved ones, and also relatives. Sometimes negative, sometimes positive. It is normal for our friends, family, and loved ones to have perception of us as it implies that they have care about us. For our seventh responder, we have Miss Braza respond says that friends and people I don't even know love. Most of the time, positive, but you never know if that's what they truly feel. Miss Braza's response have a uncertainty feel about it because she would never know if her friends and other people's response or perceptions is what they truly feel about her. And it is true. There are uncertainties in what people say about you, and you will never know if that is true because you can never know what is going on inside their mind. Mr. Holion, uh, the eighth one is Mr. Holion. His response says that mostly in my family and most of the time it is negative for me to be improve myself, and it don't have any negative impact on me but rather a motivation to improve myself and correct what is the wrong they talk about. Like some of our previous responders, Mr. Holion gets positive and negative perceptions from his family, and most of the time he says that they are negative. But Mr. Holion makes those negative perceptions of him a way to improve himself and motivate his will to correct those perceptions about him that are wrong, making himself better and eliminating those negative perceptions about him in a single stride. Our ninth responder, Mr. Velasquez, says, sa ngayon, mas madalas akong nakakatanggap ng opinion mula sa aking mga kaibigan. Ito ay halong positibo at negatibo. He receives mixed or both positive and negative opinions or perceptions from his friends like the other responders before him. The last responder, Mr. Jimenez, responds that my friends and my brother, it is both positive and negative. He receives positive and negative perceptions from his friends and family, especially specifically his brother. Like we said in the previous responder response, our family and friends will always give perceptions about us because they care for us. We can see in the number 3 questionnaire responses that the people around us have effects on us because they give us perceptions, both positive and negative. It means that they also influence us in how we see ourselves or our perceptions of ourselves as we receive their opinions about us. Now, let us proceed to the fourth open-ended question. Based on the survey conducted, 60% of the respondents' replies fell under neutral response with a perception of other people about them. These neutral responses signify disregard, ignorance, negligence, or paying no attention to the feedbacks of other people around them, especially the ones that doesn't help them to improve their personality. While 40% of the respondents stated that they respond in a positive way. This includes improving self, keeping constructive traits, and acceptance of the current negative characteristics depending on the people they talk to. First, here are the respondents who answered neutral in the survey. Our first respondent who has answered neutral to the survey is Mr. Loreto. His response says, I accept it, and I believe it since that's how they view myself and I have nothing to do with it. Meaning he accepts it and believes it, since that is how other people view himself, and he has nothing to do with it, telling us that he really isn't affected by those perceptions, even though he believes them to be true. The second respondent is Mr. Odango. He responds, hindi ko lang pinapansin, sana yan lang. This response of Mr. Odango makes him neutral as also. He does not care and just ignore the perceptions about him and go on in life like he always do. The third respondent whose answer is on neutrality is Mr. Eric. He responds, act normally. Okay, bye. Well, Mr. Eric just said act normally, implying that he just acts the same as he always is, and just go on about his everyday life which puts him in neutral. The fourth neutral respondent is Miss Braza. She responds, I don't know, I just don't really think that much about it. Meaning she also just ignores it and think nothing of other perception of her. She, like the other neutral respondents, are unaffected by what other people's perceptions of them. The fifth neutral respondent is Mr. Holyon. He responds, just accept the fact that in the end of the day you are living the world alone and no one cares for you. Maybe others might say good or bad things on you, but I will just ignore it. I am me. I am myself. If they don't like me, then don't. Here Mr. Holyon will just ignore the perceptions that are said to him and cares none of it. He also has self-esteem and confidence in himself, making those who have negative opinions and perceptions about him become things that matters not. The last respondent that falls on neutral is Mr. Jimenez. His response says, I just say okay and I will change myself when talking, interacting with you. Mr. Jimenez just ignores the perception and quickly change how he presents himself to others. In the positive side naman, here are the respondents that answer positively. The first one who answered on how do they respond with the perceptions of other people is Miss Jimenez. She responded that, depende. Kung ano yung positive, doon ako magbabase kung ano ang dapat kong i-keep pa. Kapag negative, doon ko naman i-base kung ano naman yung mga dapat kong baguhin for improvements na din. Her response is based on the positive and negative perception that other people gave her. She would retain or keep the positive perceptions and change herself when there is negative perception about her, and she will base the improvements of herself whether she needs to change that truly or not. The second one who falls in the positive side is Mr. Gusto. He responds, I'm trying to learn more from them and to mistakes as well. It means he makes the perception about him as stepping stones for improvements of himself and making sure not to make the same mistakes again. The third one is Mr. Lorenzo. He responded the same way as Mr. Gusto responds. Make their opinion as a way to be a better person, by making himself a better person based on the perceptions of others about him. The last one is Mr. Velasquez. He responds that, ang mga opinion ng ibang tao tungkol sa akin ay tinuturing kong mga aral dahil nalalaman ko ang aking mga gawin mula sa mga tao ng ibang tao. Like other positive side responders, he uses the perception as a tool. He uses them as lessons for him in his ways and actions based on eyes of the other people and thus making himself better in the process. The last question proves that there are people who are affected by looking glass self and choose to use the perceptions about them as lessons and tools to help make themselves better or more improved than ever. Others disregard and does not care about other perceptions about them and just live the life the way they usually do, unbothered by the opinions of masses and people around them. They carry on being themselves and who they really are.
Hello again, everyone. Now we're discussing the conclusion and recommendations that the proponents came up with this study. Okay, let me just fire this up. Okay, analysis of the survey data obtained in this projection shows that 60% of the chosen respondents find that looking glass self is exceedingly effective in boosting their confidence and self-esteem. The findings exhibit an efficacy of looking glass self by interpreting the changeable aspects of the person to improve and adapt their characteristics to a given social scenario. These adjustments are the ones who give a boost to a person's self-esteem through modification of their self-presentation in front of their colleagues and friends. The respondents showed similarity when it comes to receiving perspective of other people to their personality. Considering the social factors, these feedbacks and perspectives could either be a positive or negative assessment of their personality. Thus, the effects of looking glass self vary in every respondent. There are different factors that influence the effects of looking glass self. They may be classified into groups based on how, from whom, and for what reason they obtained a perspective from other individuals. One examples of how is with the external impacts of first impressions. According to the most recent studies, first impressions are the permanent. For success in one's personal, professional, and social life, one must be able to make a strong and desired first impressions, hence affecting the current and future perspective on how a person sees others' characteristics and personality. The proponents also discovered that the person who gave the feedback is extremely important with the effects of looking glass self. By who gives a perception to one's personality impacts the degree of effectiveness of looking glass self. According to the findings, family and friends have the greatest influence on one's self-image.
Another analysis of the responses concludes that looking glass self has a negative impact on 30% of the respondents' self-image and confidence. This causes them to question whether they did something wrong taking such perspective from others, leading to a negative self-image and low self-esteem. These negative effects may have an impact on a person's general perception, attitude, and course of action when interacting with another person. Instances corresponding to these negative effects collide with the aspect of personality of a person. It is said that people have their own preferences and point of view, so they only see what they wanted to see. It would be undoubtable that looking glass self may result into a deleterious position for those who experience the similar situations. Some of the respondents believe that receiving a dismissive opinion of themselves could have a reason. Considering others' feedback would lead them to overthinking, gaslighting, self-loathing, and anxiety. The final 10% of respondents are unaffected, though it depends on such factors, such as whether they trust the person who gave them the perspective enough to accept it and change themselves.
Alright, now here we have the recommendations of the produced study. The proponents highly recommend for the next and future researchers to find and conduct the investigations with a larger survey population. For further accuracy of result, it is suggested that the next researchers must use a different sampling which allows them to handpick their respondents from different perspectives and group population.
Hello, here are some of the frequently asked questions in our research. You can stay for a few minutes to discover some questions that might be bothering you in the course of the presentation. What sampling techniques did you use? The sampling technique that the proponents use is convenience sampling because it is the easiest and as from the word itself, convenient. It is the sampling that the researcher envisioned that will help us the most to identify or to get the information that the research need. The second one is, what is your procedure for qualitative analysis in your research? The list of research tools that were employed throughout the study's data collection is provided below. Surveys were used to acquire qualitative data using a survey form to gather information, make it simple to edit information needed, and cut costs. The absence of an answer form was readily remedied by using Google Forms, which also makes it simpler to share with other respondents. What is the connectivity of your research to the subject understanding the self? In accordance with the subject understanding the self, this research is connected in which this research includes studies about behaviors and perceptions from one person to another. This research also includes to study the positive and the negative effects on judgments and how it affects one's self. The next one would be, what is your research study all about? This research is all about the effects and setbacks of looking glass self to the first year CSE students, whether it is positive, negative, or nor do they care about the others' perceptions of them. This study investigates the different perceptions of the students and seeks to answer if perceptions affect them, if those perceptions affect them. This study used open-ended questions to see the percentages of the people affected by it and answer the question, does looking glass self really affects people? Now, next question would be, why did you choose to do this study? Ask the subject, understanding the self is riddled with questions asking us on how we see ourselves to understand ourselves. As the researcher pick a topic or study that involves on how a person reacts to what was said to him or her. We think that these kind of topics are relevant to the subject itself as it asks us a question, do I need to change myself in order to fit in? And this question, ma'am, motivates us to find out if we really do need to change. Does the looking glass self really affects a person thinking about his or herself? And if it did, will it changes the people to be better or to succumb to depression or self-doubt? Okay, the next question will be, why did you choose this particular title for your research? Dun tayo sa part na yun. Why did you choose this particular title for your research? This title, the see-through part, is connected to looking glass self, as these perceptions will have you asking and have you trying to see through to yourself. Why does that person have that kind of perception? It is also an analogy of what a mirror does to us. Whenever we look in a mirror, we only see us, our own reflection. In a time of trying to understand yourself, you'll find the mirror as a way to see through yourself as who you really are. Are these perceptions right about you? Who really am I? What should I change in myself? And many more questions leading to the point of realization of what should you do? What should you do? Or should you listen to what other people say to you? Is that looking glass perception really right? Or should I embrace myself for who I am and let this perception fall into deaf ears? This starting part of a title has many connections or connecting aspects to the looking glass self. Thus, we chose to use it for this study. What is the scope of your study? The scope of the study is limited on the first year CST students only. Why, you may ask? Well, we wanted to see how our batchmates are having looking glass perceptions about them. We could also get along better, resulting in an even easier collection of data on the respondents compared to the other year level students who will be a little bit intimidated, thus boring a quite hard collection of data in them as they are our seniors and we have utmost respect for them. Please leave a comment for further questions and feedback. Thank you for staying and listening.
What phenomenon were you trying to understand with this research? We, the researchers, are trying to find the effects and setbacks of looking glass self, how it affects the students and how it changes them, molds them. Does it help them to be better, or are these perceptions only bring self-doubt and self-pity to its recipients, or are they not even bothered by it and just live the way they like? We were looking at a study that part about Charles Cooley's theory of looking glass self. So who will be the most interested in your research? This thesis can help psychology students, research, or even researchers of philosophy in their works, as this study provides valuable data that may help in improving or finishing the missing parts of their studies. It will also pique the interest of the masses, as this research message is the phrase don't judge a book by its cover, and be mindful in showing perceptions to other people, and one shouldn't judge a person by what he or she sees first in that person. Did your research questions evolve during the process? If so, how? The questions did evolve in this research as the more we think of their possible answers, the more we think of how or why is their answer like that. What influenced them? How they react to it. What is the impact of their lives and how they see themselves, and many more. What gaps did you intend to bridge with your research? Alright. I think we intended to bridge the gaps of people's mindsets that a perception does not really matter to a person. We also intended to fill the gaps that the looking glass self has, like Does it really affect people, or people just don't care about them? Or does it influence a change in a person? Does it change a person's interaction to others? We, the researchers, want to make it clearer for the people to help them understand the looking glass self theory or concept and its effects even more. Why is your research significant? Okay, our research is significant because it can help people have better outlooks and change themselves and make them understand more about this topic. This study will be a great help to philosophers and also to the people of psychology, as it provides data and can help them understand their patients in psychology, their field, and to understand more about the world for the philosophers. The significance of the data of this research is valuable in determining the effects of looking glass self to people, and thus will help people understand more of this topic. What do you find in your research? We find in the data of this research that people are really affected by looking glass self, both positive and negative. The positive results in more encouragement and motivation to change and be better version of themselves, while the negative effects can cause self-doubt, self-loathing, and other negative mindsets that the other people simply does not care about, think of them, and they just live the life that they see fit, the way they enjoy it, and care not for what others think of them. What research findings surprised you? Well, the part that the family or friends of our respondents also show looking glass self impressions to the respondents as judgment in home is something we never expected to happen, because we all know that the home is a safe place, and to think that our respondents get those mixed impressions in their home is shocking to us as the researchers. So that's pretty much it, guys, for our report. There isn't much more to talk about. We've tackled everything, and if you got more questions, just email us, chat our leader or something. If you got any more questions, just leave it in the comment section down below, and see you on the next one. Thank you for listening.